Okay, welcome back to the Automation Generation, everybody. Today I'm joined by Josh, our head of technology, and we're going to be talking a little bit more about our kind of project process. So we have touched on discovery in the podcast with JV just a couple of weeks ago, but today we're going to talk a little bit about how we follow on from discovery to scoping and then to project delivery. But to start off with, I'm going to let Josh introduce himself.
Yeah, so hi, I'm Josh. I'm the head of technology at Spectrum. I first started Spectrum from probably about 12 years old, as the joke goes, right from school. So I have lived and breathed automation technology, workplace automation, all the key things that make what we do a kind of special thing for businesses. So for me, it's a huge passion to make sure that we're not only just delivering cool and exciting technology, but to help businesses with taking away that pain and the things associated with that pain and putting in more of an automated workforce.
Okay, great. And you're quite important when it comes to managing our team of automation experts in the background, aren't you, in terms of project delivery?
Yeah, absolutely. So I, from a day-to-day point of view, have two main responsibilities. My major one is looking after our implementation teams, or our technical automation engineers, making sure they've got the right tools, the right training, the right support, and the right kind of interaction with the customer. And then the second part of my role is looking at product and innovation. So I mentioned there a little bit on looking at the right tools, but are we having the right technologies in our portfolio to take us towards the needs and requirements of our customers and help accelerate that automation? The last thing we want to do is kind of become stagnant and stick in the market. We want to be able to take that and take the future of automation into our customers rather than be the one that says, yeah, we're 5 years late, we're going to start bringing this technology in. We need to be at the forefront of that. So that's kind of a key part of my role as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So there's a number of different teams really that get involved with the kind of process, I suppose, of onboarding new customers, isn't there? And like I said, we spoke to JV in the last podcast a little bit about my role when it comes down to discovery. So I get involved very early in the process, really, with talking to prospective clients about what it is that they do to start off with now, and then talking about potentially what we could do to help them alleviate any of the issues that they see that they might have with processing documents and those sorts of things. And so the discovery process itself was important for us to understand what a customer does and maybe what we will suggest in terms of our solution to them, which bits of the tool set that we've got would make sense to suggest to them. But then once that discovery is done, we also talked a little bit about the demonstration, the need for tailored demonstration to really show them something that's relevant, and the fact that the discovery kind of builds from the discovery into that tailored demonstration. But there's always going to be a point when the kind of pre-sales team, I suppose, and the commercial team gets to the point of either signing a customer up for a project or moving the project on to the next stage, which might be either a pre-paid scope or a kind of a project scope, I suppose. And that's, I kind of wanted to start there today and talk to you a little bit more about that kind of scoping process. So we've got a team of business process consultants that go out and undertake those scopes. I suppose for me, deciding with a customer whether that's a paid exercise or part of the project might come down to a number of different things. So when I'm talking to customers, it'll either be quite kind of apparent where they fit within our range of products and services, or it might be a little bit grayer in terms of exactly what the requirement is and what the best advice is to give them in essence. So it'll obviously either be, yes, we're happy after demonstration that we can see that there's a need for what you're proposing, and we'll kind of move ahead with the project without any further kind of discussion. Or there'll be some of this grey area. They might want to know a little bit more about what the costs are. We might find it difficult from a pre-sales point of view to get enough information from them to be able to create that cost profile, and we need to build on it, I suppose. And so, what do you see? What's the core role of a business process consultant for you?
Yeah, I mean, just touching on that as well, it also depends on business size and process automation size as well. So when we're looking at larger scale processes, when you're, take for example, a process from quote all the way through to delivery, if you're involving lots of different departments and teams, it's also very difficult at a pre-sales to say, well, this is exactly what it's going to be, because, well, how can you possibly have had conversations with so many different people in the process at such an early process? So that's also really important. But bringing into our business process consultants, they're really fundamental in that kind of understanding of the process, but not just understanding, also advising on the change. So one of the things that we do really, really well with our business process consultants is not just coming in and saying, well, let's just track down on paper what it is that your current process is and let's just digitize that, because all you're going to do at that point is repeat the same pains that you've got on paper or manually in a digital process. So what our business process consultants will do is they'll come and usually on site with, it seems archaic, but it's the easiest way to get people engaged with pen and paper on a whiteboard, whether there's that facility to really draw out and map out that for sticky notes. Absolutely, absolutely sticky notes. And that's the best way that we can get that process engaged. And where we can, we'll come with our ideas to start with of what the process should look like. So if we're automating something that's quite, generic or quite industry formalized, things like accounts payable or ordering processes, we'll come with our knowledge of this is what industry usually does and where do you differ, Mr. Customer. But where it's more of a bespoke process, we'll absolutely start on mapping that out. Where does the journey start for you? Where does it continue? What are the things that we need to be aware of? And also, what are the opportunities for automation here? Because what might be a very manual process today, when you actually start to capture that data, capture that process, you can start to use that to make some data-driven decisions in there as well. So they'll really drill into that process with everyone that's involved in that kind of area and process and really start to map that out and highlight those areas. And once we've done that kind of, workshop, so to speak, we'll then take that away, draw that up. There'll be a number of iterations that come out afterwards from there because it's never possible to get everything on paper from the first try. And then we'll represent that back in what are called user stories, which is quite an industry standard way of positioning work and requirements in a easy to understand way. We've learned over time taking things on a technical spec on a piece of paper, people are going to look at that and not really understand what they're getting out of it and what it actually means for the solution. So taking that into user story form as a finance manager, I want to be able to do X so that I can benefit from Y kind of thing. And that benefit's really important there as well in what we specify, because not only is it important for the customer to understand what we've understood the benefit as, but it's also important for our technical teams, because delivering that requirement, the why, makes it very, very different. If you want a car because you want to look cool, it's a very different car because you want to get there fast or whatever it might be kind of thing.
Okay, yeah, that makes some level of sense. So just to recap on that then, so the business process consultants going in, not just to map the existing process, but also to use their experience from doing multiple projects similarly in the past, which they can either be very specific in terms of something that will be repeatable, like an accounts payable process, or just using conceptually some of the things that we've done for other customers to be able to drive the conversation and to ask questions about, have you thought about doing this 100%. Differently? Have we thought about doing that? Okay. And then the output of those workshops, and you kind of mentioned there'd be usually on site and usually involving an element of whiteboarding and standing up and discussion and all those sorts of things. But the output of that is a statement of works. Yeah. And that statement of works document's got user stories, which take something technical and make it very easy to understand, so that a business user can read the statement and say, yes, that's what I want the system to do. But then one of the automation experts can take that user story and say, this is how I configure the system to do that particular thing. Yeah. Yeah, okay. And I suppose one of the other things that probably is in that statement of works is a process map, usually, of some description as well. Yeah,
so we try and, where we can, take those user stories. That's the granular level of detail, I guess, when we're talking about very specific parts of the process and breaking that down into what we call acceptance criteria and breaking that out with the specific needs of, does it do this, does it do that? But often we'll always present a process map, and depending on the process we're auditing or discovering, we might provide a as is and a to be of, this is what we understand the current process to be, and this is what we're proposing, this changes. And often we highlight those areas of automation where we've taken out manual processes and replaced those with automations or decisions that the system can take as well. And that's the first place we would always say for a customer to start, is start with that diagram. Are there any glaring holes in that process that we might have missed? But that's not going to give you the level of detail of all the decisions that happen. That's where the user stories come in to help back that up with the kind of minutiae and the specifics of what the process should do.
Yeah, so the process map's saying these are the steps that we need to take, but then the user stories are saying, well, within that step, this is how we perform that step, as it were, and this is kind of the available outcomes and what the user has to do in order to be able to move it on to the next step within that workflow.
Exactly, yeah. What the outcomes are, what the decisions might be made, what the restrictions might be. What does this user need to have done before we can move on to the next stage of the workflow as well, or any other system outside of system processes that need to be considered before we can make any decisions. So that's almost the perfect balance we've found of getting that graphical representation of the process whilst also getting into the nitty-gritty of the process, but not in a technical way, in a very user-driven way of the outcomes and decisions.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So at that point, we've kind of gone through the discovery, we've gone through the demonstration. We've either chosen to do an upfront scope, so a paid scope, because really that business process consultant, when they're going in and going through that workshop process, there's a lot of value to the customer, isn't there, at that point of that consultant going in and doing that. And there's obviously a certain amount of time involved with the business process consultant going in, running the workshops, creating the statement of works, creating the user stories, creating the process maps. But then also you mentioned that backwards and forwards of refining that.
Yeah.
So quite naturally, there's going to be a period of review and refine and review and refine. And I suppose for me, when we're doing that kind of upfront, obviously the business process consultant's time is valuable and needs to be covered, but the customer as well, if they're paying for a scope, needs to feel like they're getting some value out of that process as well.
Yeah.
And I suppose that deliverable of that statement of works and those process maps and that insight that they've given in that process is yes, important if the project goes ahead, but also has a lot of value if the project doesn't go ahead, in terms of them understanding more about what they do now and what the possibility is for the future and everything else.
Absolutely. Asking those questions in that setting of maybe people that haven't asked those questions before, or drilling into areas that people haven't questioned either, adds a huge amount of value, as well as the fact that we try and keep our statement of works as generic as possible. We're not thinking about, or maybe we are from a costings point of view and delivery point of view, what products might come into the mix when we start delivery. But as far as the requirements are concerned, that's what your requirements are for the customer. It's not about how we're going to deliver that. It's not about what the software is or the technology is. It's about ultimately what do you need as a business? And you could take that somewhere else. You could use that internally to understand the process further, or we can continue the process of taking that statement of work and then building on from there.
Yeah, I think that's really important. You mentioned that. I think one of the things that we've done is positioned ourselves as not providing off-the-shelf solutions, have we? Kind of pre-packaged solutions. Although we do have a few kind of more genericized ones that we're starting to use now. But one of our biggest selling points is really going through that process of discovery, going through that process of tailored demonstration, going through that process of getting a BPC in and running those workshops, so that we're not building software from the ground up. We're not having to rewrite code every single time or anything like that. So there aren't the inherent risks with developing a piece of software from scratch. But what we are doing is we are trying to, make that software work for the solution, not make the solution work for the
100%. Not one customer have I dealt with over the course of the last 11 years has the same process. And if we came in with out-of-the-box solutions to deliver HR or finance or automations or even BI and reporting, there's just no one customer with the same requirements. Having that flexibility to be able to say, well, we're not confined to this, and historically ERP systems are the ones with a bad name for this. Is no, you will work how SAP works, or you will work how XYZ kind of ERP system works, and that just doesn't work for most businesses, because they can't adopt those processes, because the only way that you become the most effective in the market or the best player or the most well-known or highly profitable is you can tailor your processes to your customers' needs. And if you're in a very rigid process, you can't do that. So we can really help businesses in that area. That isn't just, we're coming in and you're going to work the way that we do, and therefore you're not going to get as much gain as you possibly could do in that automation rate or whatever it might be that the ultimate game is. We can really get into the point where we understand what that kind of cost versus benefit is and hit the sweet spot right in the middle of exactly what you need and how far we can get with automation as well.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense. So after we've kind of gone through that business process consultant processes, in terms of creating the statement of works and getting it signed off and everything else, what comes next from the business process consultant once that project's signed off as something that's moving ahead?
Yeah, so once that process has been signed off, and that is the most important part of that statement of work, is that our customers review that as well, really get into the detail and understand that before we move on to the next steps. That's not to say things can't change, but the easiest place to change something is that first step But ultimately, once we've got that statement of work signed off, the delivery process then is really what kicks into gear. So we'll do a kick-off meeting usually with the customers to kind of understand, okay, let's get in touch with all the stakeholders at this point, because we might not have met everyone that's going to be involved in the delivery. Let's set out our delivery process as well in this so that we're all on the same page. The last thing we want is to start a process, all of a sudden people start beavering around and you've got no idea who they are and what they're doing. We want to make sure that you get an opportunity to meet the team, we get an opportunity to meet your team, and that we can kind of start that process off. So that's the really important part of the process. Not only introducing stakeholders, but setting that timeline and expectation for what we need from you as a customer and what we would be setting out to kind of do ourselves as well.
Okay, that makes some level of sense. I think we're getting towards the end of our time today, so it was great to talk to you about the process up until kind of getting the project signed off and start having those first project kickoff meetings. I think it'd be great in another episode if we could touch on what happens in terms of managing those projects kind of back of house almost. So how do we, what meetings do the automation experts, have on a daily or weekly basis to make sure they understand what work they need to be doing for each of the projects, and how that project's continuing, and what interaction you're having with the users and the client during that process. So if it's okay, I'd like to invite you back to discuss that at a later date.
100%. Fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Josh. Well, yeah, I think that's enough for us today on the automation generation, and it sounds like next time we'll be talking a little bit more in depth about the process further on downstream.
Fantastic.